Thanks to everybody for joining me this evening. This is Game Audio for the Future, and my name is Alexander Brandon, and I've been going to these things for a little while now, and I try to change them up every once in a while. What the format of this is going to be talking about just my perspective on game music over the past 20 years, where it's come from, where it's been. I geek out over NES and SNES scores. I have them on my iPhone. This is you're my peeps. We all share a ton of similar interests and love of retro stuff. But in addition, there's some really great modern stuff that's coming out that's pretty amazing. But there's also challenges. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about where I've come from, and if you're not familiar with me yet, and also where I see game music going, because it's quite the challenge to figure out where we're going to go. And I was talking to John, who is the guy that you met outside as you're coming in, the volunteer that checks your badge. He's like, can you give me a 15-minute summary? And I was like, wow, yeah. And we got to the point where it was, I hadn't actually thought of it this way, but it's like there's an orchestral ceiling, like the ultimate of everything is an orchestra, and that's like, so I'm here to sort of challenge those things and talk about some thoughts that I've had about ways of integrating audio, ways of producing audio, instrumentals and things like tools like Audio Kinetics Wise, which I'm going to be giving a 101 course at the Jam Clinic. If you can make it, we're literally like right after this panel, I'm going to be rushing over to the Jam Clinic and doing that. And Audio Kinetics Wise is middleware, which is the integration tool for game audio. You put sound effects and you put VO in, and you give it event names, and then you put it into a game. And that's sort of the link between a game engine like Unity and Unreal and audio. So all of that aside, we're really about conjecturing where things are headed. And last year I also talked about kind of personal stuff and things along the lines of I'm not good enough, or I don't think I could ever get into this business, or what have you. And I think a lot of us in this room are seeing some walls come down, but there's still a ton of challenges, right? So before I delve into that, I started writing music or game music actually, probably starting in 1994 for a game called Tyrion by a company back then was known as Epic Mega Games. And now they're known as Epic Games, and their big hit is Fortnite, and my 12-year-old plays it constantly, and he cusses at me. Well, doesn't really, but he gets very upset if I tell him to leave because you can't pause the game, and I'm like, oh, yay, go Epic, you're so successful, and you're ruining my child's life now. But it is a challenge, right? So anyway, so I started with Epic, and Tim Sweeney gave me my first paycheck, and I literally went, we're not worthy, because I had the programmer from Tyrion with me, and that was the most money we'd ever seen at the time. And it was and still is a huge honor to have been able to do that. Since Tyrion, there's been games along the lines of Unreal Tournament, Deus Ex, and following that stint of Unreal Engine games, I then moved over to Midway Home Entertainment, and I got to do stuff for things like Gauntlet 7 Sorrows, and Ant Bully, and Rampage Total Destruction. I was the audio director on that, and I did some voiceover. After that, I moved over to Obsidian and started Obsidian's audio department. How many people here have played Obsidian role-playing games, like Pillars of Eternity or whatnot? Okay, cool. They make really good role-playing games, and they came from Interplay, and they were known as Black Isle back then, and they used to make things like Icewind Dale, and now they're working on some more Pillars of Eternity stuff. They also did Fallout New Vegas. Anybody play Fallout New Vegas? Yeah. That's Obsidian for you. They're a really cool company. They just got by Microsoft, which is going to lead into more stuff. But after Obsidian, I left Obsidian because my family really, and myself, wanted to be in Texas. And so we moved back to Texas, and I joined Heatwave Interactive, and we did a Facebook game called Platinum Life, which was sponsored by, or funded by, Syncom Venture Partners, which actually were some of the key people that started BET. And we got to work with actually, he calls himself Tip T.I. It was T.I., the rapper T.I. So we got to work with him. We almost got to work with Tribe Called Quest, and that was a big bummer because they're my favorite hip hop band from the 90s. But whatever, it was a different experience because we were trying to appeal to a very different crowd, and Mafia Wars was going strong, and they wanted a hip hop version of Mafia Wars. Basically, that's what they wanted. And it didn't end up really working out. They didn't really make any money. It was a venture capital firm, and they crashed and burned. After that, I've been going freelance as part of Funky Rustic, and that's the as you can see here, that is the company that I run with my wife Jeanette. She keeps me from making really stupid financial decisions, and I do the creative side of things and bring in the actual projects. And it's been quite an amazing ride. Most recently, I finished up work with a company called Retro Studios. Anybody here heard of Retro Studios? How many people here have heard of Metroid Prime? That's and Donkey Kong Country Returns and Donkey Kong Country Returns Tropical Freeze. Okay, so they made all those games. I spent 2 years at this amazingly awesome studio, and when it comes to really trying to get things absolutely right, Nintendo really tries to get things absolutely right. And some things, sometimes we try things that work, sometimes we try things that don't work. And out of those 2 years, the thing that you will see that I am allowed to even talk about is the parrot of Funky Kong in the Switch version of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. So, that's 2 years. I did a 20-minute session, and that's what came out of that. But hey, I still, my kids are playing that and saying like, "Hey, that's my dad," and I'm just like, "Yeah, that's your dad." That's amazing. That's like the freaking Donkey Kong game. So, it was a great honor to work with these guys, and it's an amazing team. But it also reinvigorated, or it gave me a lot of new experience with what one might call AAA, where before I'd be working more with mid-tier. So what I'm going to do is break things down into the way you can look at how games are made dev-wise. If you haven't already heard this a billion times at this show, so I apologize if this is repeat information. You got your indie games, and those games can, it can mean anything, but it really is usually, or it has to be a team that isn't signed to a major publisher. That's number one. Number two, it's also a team that is working based on funding that isn't usually a ton of money, right? There could be independent productions that are made for millions of dollars, but typically you don't refer to that studio as necessarily as an indie studio. There's great examples of this. Journey started as a indie game, but it ended up being a not indie game because Sony ended up publishing it. But what a game Journey is, right? So obviously some big companies can take a look at stuff that independent studios do, and then they pick them up and they fund them, and then they get the kind of stuff that they really want to end up doing. Austin Wintory gave a great GDC speech on his technique for music in that, which is, how many people here have played Journey? Okay, so a lot of people, right? So Journey's technique is a great example of indie iteration and indie just imaginative, let's just try this, right? We're not just gonna go, oh, it's a AAA game, we need an orchestra, right? They were thinking, well, how do we create whatever the mood is? How do we create whatever the entire soundtrack and ambient sound design is going to affect in terms of the way that we want the player to approach, the way they feel in the game as they make decisions and as they progress. So Austin Wintory decided to say, okay, well, I'll have it start to be, more synthetic, and then as you progress through the game, it's going to gradually morph as the further you go into more acoustic. And so that whole thing was there were tons of layers, everything had to be really well mixed and cross-faded because the experience is really super seamless. Another example of this is Ori and the Blind Forest. Not necessarily a super indie game, but definitely one made with a slightly lower budget. And Gareth Coker, who I think, has anybody seen him? He said he was gonna be here. At the show. So anyway, he's been at MAGFest before, and super genius dude. He also weaved dynamics to make it sound as though the game is being scored as you play, and it's responding to what you're doing, but it's almost as though it's being written as you make decisions, which is the ultimate goal of any game composer or any game audio professional. So that's so you've got independent, then you've got mid-tier, and mid-tier could be, say, a several $million Kickstarter game in the vein of In Exile games such as Torment, Tides of Numenera. I was the audio director on that one. And I was also the audio director on Wasteland 2, and I'm currently the audio director on Wasteland 3. Also working on System Shock 3, but I'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. Back to the good old days, right? Working with good old Warren Spector and the gang. So yeah, mid-tier is just, it's not super AAA, it's not, you'll typically find a budget audio-wise that you work with, and you'll find several full-time employees, but a typical budget would be, I'd say, in between $100,000 and $200,000 for sound design, and upwards of, you can, depending on the amount of music you need, I would be surprised if Battlefront's score, including the orchestral recordings and all the integration for the internal teams, wasn't like $500,000. So these are, entire audio budgets for a AAA game can span between like $1 to say even as high as $4 million. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be the case where we had to scrape along with whatever we could do in the span of 6 months, and we would like just wait for royalties because we wouldn't necessarily be paid at the time of the work that we were doing because there was no money. And working with Epic, it was a shareware company, and they didn't pay employees. You would make a game, then you'd sell it, and then they'd give you a percentage. And sometimes that can make you a lot of money if your game is successful. But that was another different model. So there's a ton of opportunities for people to be able to, whether it's through game jams, whether it's through being able to download these game engines like Unity and Unreal and Audiokinetics Wise and just dive right in to start making stuff. Yes, it is quite, if you want to approach a really high bar like an FPS, it is incredibly complicated if you want to set your bar that high. But it doesn't have to be. And a lot of people are taking that opportunity to be able to make simpler 2D environments and 2D landscapes and side-scrollers and top-down and isometric games so that they can actually create something that people, really, can get into that demonstrates, their talent, and they can put the mechanics that they want that they think will really change somebody's experience, right? So that's what this is all about. We don't necessarily want to play another Metroidvania game. I can't believe I'm saying this. I mean, look at this little screw attack symbol, right, or screw attack on my arm here. It's, I'm a huge Metroid fan, but I don't necessarily look for a Metroidvania experience in what I'm, playing next. And for that very reason, people here, raise your hand, played Breath of the Wild. Right, so perfect example of a game that you think right? You think it's like, oh, it's a Zelda game. I was not a Zelda fan. My 9-year-old has beat this game 3 times in a row. And that just goes to show that like everybody, and not quite yet, that everybody that I'm familiar with, like of all age ranges, and even like somehow it manages to be easy enough for a 9-year-old. He's actually pretty good at games, but easy enough for my 9-year-old to beat, but also it can be challenging for people my age or people that are more hardcore or what have you. So those are sort of approaches that challenge the AAA, right? So when you get into AAA, like I already talked about the budgets for that, but in terms of the future, here's my perspective. If I'm going to go to a company and they say, we want you to score this, what's fun, here's the paradox. The paradox is, on one hand, I'm known for whatever I'm known for. Okay, Jazz Jackrabbit 2, great, yeah, that was, thank you. That was fun to work on. It was, a fun Sonic-ish game, and that was Cliff Bleszinski's whole plan for it, and it was a lot of fun to do. And it was just writing a piece of music per level, right? You get to flex your creative chops and see if you can create the right vibe, and it's that simple. So that's something that's just easy to conceptualize, right? So then you have to think, wait a minute, where do I go after that? Because a lot of people that are, that have the experience that I do, or even people that are just getting in, that are just like, okay, I'm going to write my 1-minute themes. I'm going to put them out on Bandcamp, and I'm just going to, now I'm writing chiptunes. Now I'm doing like cool game music because I'm getting my fix because I like chiptunes and I'm getting to express myself through chiptunes. Awesome, that's really, really good, and that's great because we have the tools to do that practically for free now, where it was, like back in the day, I'm like, how do they make that Nintendo music? I'm never going to be able to make Nintendo music. I'm like, anybody that wants to can make Nintendo music with free VSTs. So it's pretty cool. It may not be exact. I'm sorry if there's chiptune purists. I'm sure there's at least 1 or 2 in here. So I want to respect that. In terms of actually, directly accessing the hardware, but just, from a basic standpoint of creative satisfaction, you can get into a VST, create an NES tune really, really easily. So all of that's done, and we've written for orchestras, and we've written for synthesizers, and we're just sitting there going like, okay, what's next? Well, okay, if we want to go way out into left field from just a creative standpoint, just whether it's TV or anything else, we can just approach a game or a soundtrack, or even just an entire sound design aesthetic for an entire, audio pillars foundation of what we want the game to be like. Whatever it is, we can just use sounds, right? The sound design can become the score. Now, have people here played Olivier Deviere, I think is the composer's name, and he wrote music for a game where you play a guy that's schizophrenic, and you're experiencing it from within this guy's head. And the actual sound design reflects the insanity of you. And so therefore, he didn't write the score like a score. He wrote the score like certain things that had tonality, like a flickering light, would rise and fall dynamically and sort of make this pulsing sound, almost as though you're listening to music, but it's the sound design of the game that's just getting into your head, and then you go someplace else and it might echo again, or you might hear a radio from something else. So it's pretty freaky, and I can't even say that it sold all that well just because it was this sort of experiment. But when I saw it, I was like, that at least is a step to make something different, right? It's a step to be able to say, yep, it's not going to be a standard platformer, it's not going to be a Call of Duty, it's not going to be a Super Mario Odyssey, even though Mario and Zelda employ incredibly different game mechanics in order to keep them fresh and awesome. They're still the games that they are. So the audio follows the exact same path. So back to what I was saying. People know me for whatever it is that I do on one hand. On the other hand, I want people to approach me to say, we would like you to take a completely different approach to this, and we have some ideas, and we'd like you to give it a shot. And I think how many people here are interested in writing music for games? I'm hoping a lot of you are. So if you are, like, just getting that as something in your psyche, if you don't already, I'm sure you probably do in some way, like being able to say, like, what is, there's stuff that everybody does, right? And you're going to find game teams and producers and programmers that will approach you and will talk to you and will say, yeah, we already know what we want for this game, right? Because they're vested in the game's success and whatever how the audio design affects the work that they're doing, because it all ties together, whether it's artwork or otherwise, and they're going to put in their 2 cents, right? And they absolutely should. So a lot of people that are in my profession will say, "Oh, that's a terrible idea." Anybody here seen John Mulaney, the comedian on Netflix? Okay, so like he's talking about working with Mick Jagger on a skit for SNL, because he used to be a writer on SNL. And so yeah, I'm saying this is a sort of a metaphor for this is how it feels sometimes when you're being talked to by like the head of a project or something. So Mick Jagger would listen to these ideas, these skit ideas that John Mulaney would write. And if Mick Jagger didn't like something, he'd go, "No." But if he did like it, he'd go, "Yeah." And that was that essentially, he's like, yeah, super famous people are weird because they're used to getting whatever it is they want. So if all he has to do is go, "No." Yeah. Yeah, so that was the summit. So it kind of feels like when somebody says, we know what we want for this game and we've got the idea and we just want you to execute it. That can happen all day long. But interestingly enough, even though Austin Wintory is mostly, as much as humanly possible, about live, right? Like he loves doing live stuff. Like I tried to geek out about ad-lib soundtracks, and he's just like, yeah, man, I'm sorry, I don't really know what you're talking about. I'm not really into that. I like writing stuff for like strings and piano and other things. Anybody here played Monaco? Because that was another score that he worked on. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and it's like this sort of old ragtime piano, like Scott Joplin style, like almost like whatever that Super Mario theme is, or Super Mario World theme is. So but it's all about live, and he doesn't even recognize the use of synths, but they're all tools in the toolbox. So when you have anybody approach you to say, we think we know what's going on, like, and you really want to, it doesn't necessarily hurt, even though it has me scared even mentioning it, right? Because I'm hesitating, right? It shouldn't have any of us scared to be able to say, what if we did something really weird? Or what if we did something really different? And obviously it should be something along the lines, that you might have prepared as far as like what the idea is for the game based on what you've already heard from something that somebody wants you to do. Or heck, if it's something that you're already working on and you have the power to do it, think to yourself, guess what? I'm going to make it so that the sound design in this game is the soundtrack, or I am going to use little tiny Minecraft cubes in order to construct the entire score, and so that when the player goes around, they get little responsive musical motifs that then can build and link and interlock and form entire songs or whatever it is. That's something that I'm really interested in doing, and it's really, really difficult. But if you go to the Y session, I can demonstrate a little bit about how that might be done, but I haven't been able to do it yet. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to demonstrate, and actually I want there to be more, like at least half and half Q&A, so that anybody in here can ask whatever they want to ask, and I'll give you as much information as I possibly have. So I'm guilty myself of, like, it's funny because like I think that combining orchestra and electronic is something that's like relatively new, and of course it's really not new. Like Tron was combining orchestra and electronic back in 1982. So, it's just like, I want electronic orchestral. It's going to be really hip and cool. So we did that for, I'll preface this a little bit. Avon Colony is a game that was developed in Austin by Mothership Studios. Paul Tozer was the main developer, and he had some really cool ideas. And as a matter of fact, they were so cool, I was like, yeah, let's totally go with that. I might have done things a little differently, but here's the cool aspect. As you build this city that you're in, let me see if I can go direct to YouTube. Hello? Yes, so I load it in YouTube, and then I full screen it. And as you can see, as you build these cities, he wanted it to progress from a very low-key synthetic pulse, like just something that sounded synthy, but not like 80s. I guess it's synth wave, right? Stranger Things or whatever it is, business wave, this wave, that wave, and nothing like that. He wanted something that sounded synthetic, but also alien at the same time. So there's a lot of tools that can do that. An example of that is the eDNA library by Spitfire. They take their orchestral recordings and they combine them with synth, actual waves and filters in order to get sort of a synthetic and organic sound at the same time. So I use those a lot, but it had to be low key. And as your colony builds, you get gradual layers, right? Now there's two main techniques that a lot of composers will tell you, including Winifred Phillips is a good example of one, and there's a lot of books on this. Chance Thomas also has a book on game music. But there's the horizontal approach and the vertical approach. So horizontal means you've got like a whole track, stereo track, 5/1 track, whatever, and it plays and it loops, and until you want to have something changes that the player makes a decision, and then it crossfades nicely into another segment, and that might be rendered out with like an additional layers within that. That's kind of what we did, right? Like it's the horizontal approach. But within the tracks themselves is also the vertical approach. That means in the game engine, you actually layer these stereo waves, and usually they are all lined up exactly so that they will be in sync, and you will mute them or unmute them, or you will crossfade them, and they will fade in as things change. And then if something sudden needs to come in, you can add a stinger, and then you can duck the music slightly, or you can use something called side chaining. I'm sorry if I'm losing some of you here. This is slightly technical. Side chaining just means if something plays, the engine detects, hey, these are the frequencies this thing is using, so I am going to lower only the frequencies that are being used by this other thing in order to make room for it, but I don't lower the volume of the entire existing playing track. So side chaining is a really cool technique. Or it can work in the context of a single track where only when a bass drum plays, it'll slightly lower the volume of the bass player's track. That's another example of side chaining. So in this, like it would go from this low-key synthetic aspect, and it would gradually layer over like 4 layers. So it would be sort of colony, and then advanced colony, and then you'd gradually get to a city in which orchestral aspects would start coming in, just like in Journey. And then finally you'd have Glory of Civilization, where you'd have vocals, and you'd have this big, massive, dynamic, or more forte than anything else situation going on. Actually, wait. That's actually, yeah. So I think this is the second down, or the Glory of Civilization track for this particular area. So it's supposed to really represent just like, oh wow, it's really, you've got a sense of satisfaction. You're just like, hey, I'm actually kind of happy that I've built all this, and the music needs to tell you that that's what's going on. So yeah, if you haven't checked out Avon Colony, it is really cool for like, if anybody here likes City Skylines or Tropico or any of those kind of games, if you like that, check out Avon Colony, because it is, there's really well done and not too complicated management and stuff going on, and everything affects everything else, so it's very sandboxy and it's a lot of fun. So what's next on here? Ooh, Void Runner, wow. This is an example of somebody that said, I love your Unreal Tournament music, and I want to be able to use this in a Kickstarter project, which didn't actually get the Kickstarter money, but we got paid. I felt so sorry for this guy. Yeah, but I mean, he owns the tracks and he used them, and the game actually got released, but they didn't get the money that they needed. So yeah, that's kind of like, sort of standard, more standard electronic. And that goes sort of against, the concepts that I'm talking about. There's no super special interactive techniques, it's just solid electronic tracks. And yeah, people really still dig those, so it's not like that isn't something that can be employed in games these days. But another thing to think about is that the concept behind the audio that you're creating of all that, you know, originality and trying new things and trying them over again until you get something that you're like, oh, whoa, that's not just a library sound, that's actually something that sounds kind of cool. That's almost lightsaber-like, that's really unique and cool, and I think it works really well for this. So for those situations, it doesn't just apply to the audio, it applies to every aspect of the game. And a lot of composers and sound designers that provided the culture of the game company or the game team that you're working with really encourages that, and a lot of them actually do. Some of them don't. Some of them say, just, you know, eat your porridge and do your audio, and yeah, that's all I want you to do. And sometimes that's when it becomes the job. And a little tip on that from Matt Pearsall of Glee. They do a lot of cool audio for teams in Austin and otherwise. They worked on Prey, which is a great game, and they did great sound design for that. But Matt says, I have my techno. He's a DJ as part of a duo called Fitness and Health. And they play in Austin, they have a really good time, and they make some really cool sounding beats. And he's like, that's mine. That is, and so like, I'm sure a lot of you have your own personal music projects. So that's something that he has control over. So that when a game company says, quiet, jeez, forearm damage. Damage. All right. So he says he has that, so that when a company tells him, or anybody from a company says, hey, we want this revised 18 gazillion times, he's like, okay, no problem. And a lot of times that, you know, like that's another aspect of finding balance, is being able to encourage the people that you're working with to, you know, take more risks and make something truly different. And, oh, this is a job and I need to pay bills. So that's a tough sort of balancing act to do, and I have to admit I do it every day. It never hurts to suggest something, right? You could say, well, yeah, what do you think of this? Would this be cool? And obviously if you make a ton of suggestions and they start getting tired of it, you're just like, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm good. But usually that's not the case. Usually, you know, people that really want you to be able to do the best stuff that you're capable of will welcome feedback. So ultimately, I'm going to wrap up this portion by saying that, yes, orchestras are not the end-all, be-all of AAA games. And obviously, when you play a game like Breath of the Wild, you're not really so much hearing an orchestra a lot. Like, you'll hear like a piano play, or you'll hear like some little synth stuff going on in the shrines. The shrines have some pretty cool stuff going on, but it's all very sort of low-key. And there's some people that didn't like that, but I really liked it because I thought it was a different approach, but it seemed to work with this exploration type gameplay that I was with. I didn't have these themes that were battered into my head that I was just like, yeah, I want to hear that at the next Video Games Live, and that's awesome, and I can dance to it. No, it's, you know, you're in this vast environment that you're going to spend a long time walking from one place to another and doing quests, and that's why I thought that concept really worked for Zelda in that case. But a lot of American-made AAA games are just like, yeah, we're going to Abbey Road. Going to Abbey Road because we all went, I don't know, that's how we know we're cool. And you know, if somebody said, hey, Alex, you want to go to Abbey Road? I'm not just going to be like, nah. Obviously, that's an amazing thing. But I might actually just say, yeah, let's go to Abbey Road, but maybe when we get there, like, we smash a bunch of cars together. I don't know. We don't just bring in these members of the London Symphony that I've worshipped since the first Star Wars soundtrack. Yeah, I mean, really, those, you know, like, if John Williams were here, I bet he would be like, look, don't copy me. For God's sake, please. Everyone's been referencing me ever since, you know, whenever, and I want you guys to blaze your own trails and figure out what your coolness is. Like, yeah, be the next John Carpenter. Be the next, you know, James Horner, you know, with slightly different styles, yes, using an orchestra. Or even Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer, oddly enough, even though he's famous for the boom, and people make fun of him all day long, it's like, I saw, what was it? The movie was 12 Years a Slave. Loved the movie. And like, I loved the score, so I waited till the end, and I was like, who wrote the score for this? Hans Zimmer. And I was like, what? Like, this is such a, how many people here have watched that? Okay, check it out. I mean, the score alone is worth watching that movie for. And by the time you get to the end, you're just like, how is that a Hans Zimmer score? Because it's got this weird, like, it's like ambient stuff and this sort of like, I don't know, it's not thematic. And I think he is sick to death of people telling him to write these, you know, dun 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 dun, you know, standard fare, right? So that's the struggle we are all in, and I think here I had just a bit of a profound moment. Maybe we're not looking for like a single next big thing. Maybe we're not looking for, oh, we all remember John Williams and James Horner and the themes from our youth, and we want that singular creative or concept to shift over to, oh, now this is the next big thing, and this is what the kids are going to be into. Maybe instead of this, like that, maybe it's this. Maybe it's all over the map. And maybe like it's any number of different techniques, and it has nothing to do with, oh, well, I wish things were like Williams again. Maybe that's not the way things need to be. I actually just realized that just now. And it's kind of freaking me out, man. Yeah. You need a little alcohol. Okay. Ponder this further. The contemplation of that question requires another bevy. So, with that in mind, hopefully I've given you guys some food for thought, because this is the stuff that I think about on a regular basis. I know a lot of my colleagues, Gordy Hobb, Chance Thomas, Jesper Kidd, Inan Zur, Gerard Marino, heck, Frank Klepacki, all these guys think about these problems all the time. And the battles are the same ones like that I was saying, where, oh, status quo, or let's turn something on its ear, but let's not, like, you know, make people just reach for the mute button. So with that in mind, any questions at all, come on up to this microphone, speak right in, and I will hopefully have an answer for you.
Yeah, this is completely unrelated to everything you just said.
No problem.
Who are your influences musically, obviously?
Who are my influences musically? Let's see. Well, you know, there's musical influences from my youth, and there's like current ones. Like growing up, definitely Peter Gabriel was a big one, and they're kind of all over the map, right? Like, so I used to listen to things like Mozart and Bach and Beethoven, because my parents weren't into pop music at all. And so, yeah, definitely Mozart's up there. And Steve Vai, once I discovered Steve Vai, he's a big influence. Alan Howarth, who, anybody here familiar with that guy? He wrote the score for Halloween and Big Trouble in Little China, and he worked with John Carpenter. And he goes to GDCs, and I got to meet him, and we got to have dinner, and he told me about the synths he used on this stuff, and it's a really, really cool guy. We got to get him out here at MAGFest. So he's kind of a hero of mine. And you know, there's also game composers out there. Yuzo Koshiro is way high on my list of oh geez, I actually interviewed this person. Who did the score for Strider? Yun Funahashi, I think.
That sounds right.
Okay, yeah. So I interviewed her, and seriously, Strider for the Genesis is like my favorite, like 8/16, whatever you want to call it, score. Like the music for Strider is just unbelievable. So that's just a few.
Modern influences?
Oh, modern. I'm sorry. Yes, modern influences. Yeah, that Zimmer track from 12 Years a Slave is way high on that list. I do like the Interstellar soundtrack as well. You know, he's injecting, you know, pipe organ into things just to try to make, you know, it's like, hey, let's not just do everything that's been done before. Frost. Frost is a progressive band. And if nobody here has heard of Frost, you should definitely check them out because they're really, really good. Their latest album, Falling Satellites, came out a couple years ago, and it's pretty awesome. And again, that's just a few. Like I listened to Bella Fleck, I listened to, you know, like, geez, the hit points. How many people heard that, like, bluegrass group, like either last night or the night before? I think it was Thursday night, right? Yeah. Oh my God, those guys are awesome. Hit points. Go look them up on Spotify, buy their stuff, make them millionaires. They're really, really good. So yeah, I'm discovering new stuff every day, but thanks for asking.
Thank
you. Two questions related to using electronic synths and drums.
Sure.
One, in terms of blending an organic and a synth sound, not necessarily inorganic, what conceptually do you think of when you're applying them? Like, oh, am I going to use this piano sound but with drones to emulate strings, or
It's all raw, random experimentation. But it's usually with a specific intention in mind. Like, you know, if I know, like, for Haven Colony specifically, I was given examples of, okay, this planet has this atmosphere, it has this kind of, these kind of life forms living on it, these are the hazards you're going to encounter on it, and I get a description, and therefore when you're going to be starting out on the colony, I will definitely use different techniques in order to create the synthy organic type sound for a ice world than I will for like a desert world. But sometimes one will work better for the other. Like I might use like really high frequency stuff and blend, you know, and it won't just be like eDNA. I'll use eDNA as like a track, and then another good technique to use is, say, taking a standard synth and then running it through, say, a granular plugin. I don't know if you've ever tried stuff. Yeah, like that can yield some really, really cool, unique type sounds. And so, yeah, combining your stuff in terms of just, you know, different effects, and then you can take almost any, you can take almost any sound design source, and you know, you can melodyne it so that you can give it a tone, and then use that granular plugin on it as well, and then see, you know, what sort of effects you have there. But always starting with something that is derived from an actual recorded source, like strings or horns or piano or whatever. But I don't have something specific in mind, like, and I'll say it definitely needs this or that.
And second question related, and the answer might actually be the same.
Okay.
In terms of the actual orchestration, how do you implement this and sounds?
And so when you say orchestration, like...
well, in your terms, sequencing, but the actual creation of the track rather than the creation of the sound.
So like, you know, the composition technique. Okay, yeah, so like when
Two different questions.
Yeah, no. It's when composition is definitely different, because what affects the composition greatly is the design that goes in at the beginning based on what the game requirements are. So I'll start with like that, you know, if I start with just a simple track that needs only a few, you know, so synth and organic combined, then I will only have, you know, I'll only have a few tracks in there, and I'll keep it really, really simple. And then when it, you know, for each of the layers, usually for all of those, you know, areas between when you would be from the soft synthetic just base colony to the glory of civilization, it'll be one project. So I will literally just layer on instruments, and it will all just fit into, like, you know, and I'll add melody.
Maybe make markers on where you export for the sounds?
In some cases, yes. And like, you know, so the vertical approach that I'm talking about, where I layer stuff, I just select the tracks, and then I solo those tracks, and then I will export those for the groupings of the things that need to layer.
Okay.
And then, but if it's a horizontal approach, and I say, okay, now we're in the exploration mode versus the action mode, then I'll put markers in my DAW to say, okay, now we're in action mode, and then I'll only select those and then export that.
Awesome. Thank you
very
much.
Sure, no problem.
Hey, going back to you talking about the vertical approach, my question is that seems like it takes a lot of communication with the dev team, the engineers, and that sort of thing, getting the right cues and that sort of thing. Is that usually handled on the front end? What's the process for, you know, that workflow? I guess making sure you're getting, you know, checking all the markers. How does that work?
I'm glad you asked. The session that I'm going to be doing right after this one is going to explore a lot of that. Audio kinetics wise, as long as you know what the structure is, like you say, you define the behavior up front, and usually that goes into a document of some sort that the team should, like a Google Doc or whatever, so that, you know, all the team has visibility, or the stakeholders of the team, like producer, whoever, you know, even the engineer, will have eyes on it, and you'll say, okay, music needs to do this when the player does this, music does this, you know, so you define your basic behaviors there, and then it could be a spreadsheet, whatever. And then when you start writing your stuff, you define it based on those parameters, and you say, okay, it's this, and actually that's in the document as well, it's this many bars, this length of time, etc., right? So then, after that, when you start exporting, you export that in segments, and then those segments go into playlists in Wise. And when you put them in Wise, then you define your events, and you can select your transitions and the behaviors, and voila! It goes into the game, and the game calls those events, and when the events get called, magic happens. Like, that's where the actual behavior takes place. And like almost 100% of this is the composer or the interactive music engineer. You know, like, so sometimes composers will write the music, and they're like, look, you know, Chance Thomas is one of these people. Like, he gets the concept of horizontal and vertical and certain concepts as far as writing music is concerned. But when it comes to like hopping into the tools and actually putting it in, Jack Wall does not do that. Like he also, you know, he did Black Ops, I think, and he's just like, I'm a composer. Look, I'm realistic about what my capabilities are, and I really know what I can do well, and I'm going to stick to being the best at what I do, and that's writing music. Wow, is everybody okay over there? You heard that scream? Yeah, that's pretty ear piercing from over there. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, this can all be done depending on your comfort level. But again, this is a tool that's free. You can download it and use it up to 200 files with it, and yeah, play around and learn.
Do you see it becoming more prevalent, or is kind of reaching equilibrium point as far as how much is dynamic?
Well, okay. So like there's a really quick two-part answer to that. I do see the use of these tools being used far more and more because they do make it so much easier than getting your music ready and then just sort of looking at your watch and going, programmer. Oh, do I go into Unity and code it in C#? And so these guys from Ubisoft decided to say, you know, like we've had it with, you know, relying on programmers for all of our, you know, dependencies, and we're going to make a tool that we can use ourselves that will allow the stuff to fit. So from that perspective, yes. From another perspective, there are plenty of people like Jack Wall that say, I just want to write the music, man. I want to like be able to put the feeling in and everything. And there's people that integrate music that are just like, well then you're being lazy now. And you know they can be jackasses about it, right? So it's down to what you're comfortable with, and what, you know, like the overall industry, whether it's indie or otherwise, is comfortable doing. And there's plenty of new or young and fresh audio or composers that say, I'm learning C++, and I'm just like, you go. Get on with your bad self. Enjoy C++. I'll stick with Wise. Thank you very much.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Sure.
So the music that I usually...
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I've got this all wrong. What's your name in the back? No, you just asked the question. I'm sorry. What? Drew. I'm sorry. I haven't asked people's names. I can't just be like, you're a face. I'm just gonna, you know, answer an email that has no name on it. So Drew, thank you. I'm sorry. Who was there?
Drew. I'm Dean.
Dean, thank you. And there was somebody that just asked about the competition.
Joseph.
Joseph. Okay, great. Anybody else I didn't get? Okay, great. Thanks. What's your name?
All right, I'm Jared.
Jared. Everybody, give it up for Jared. And everybody else that went before him. And all who have gone before him. All right.
So most of the music that I hear in games nowadays is orchestral or electronic, but I think there's kind of like infinite possibilities for other genres.
Yes.
What kind of genres do you think would work well in game music, and like how do you see that kind of field expanding? Because I really just hear a lot of orchestral in the games.
Orchestral and electronic. What kind of genres would work better? Metal, man.
I hear metal a lot too, like Doom.
Yeah,
but
there's
like,
a lot of
other
metal
than
too. Weather Channel music. I was just having a conversation about this. I'm sorry. I like Weather Channel music. Look up Rippingtons, and it's like a warm blanket. You know. I mean, obviously, people will just be like, "This is what Weather Channel music, dude? Come on, smooth jazz." No, I do like that sort of stuff. But as far as the coolest games that I've seen, like, well, let's take. I'm going to take Austin Wintory's example again. So it's just this sort of ambient bed, and every once in a while you'll just hear like this, you know, this like really beautiful high above it all, an oboe, a single note hanging there unwavering until a clarinet took it over. You know, like, but really, like thinking in those terms, like, you know, without necessarily limiting it to instruments and saying like, I want this in this place, or I want this in this place. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm way ADD, so I'm getting distracted when I hear rah, rah. Anyway, yeah, so it's, I don't even think about it necessarily categorically. And I hate to not answer your question directly, but you know, because when you're discussing things with other people, it's easier to just say, think of this genre, think of that genre, or even use this reference track, which sometimes is even easier than saying that there's something in a genre. But yes, I love using like old school synths, but like I don't want to just like pigeonhole an entire soundtrack into old school synth. And I want to use like, you know, certain elements of that in certain areas. Like, why not surprise somebody? Like, you've got this string quartet, and all of a sudden, you, like in the middle of it, and you're like, what was that? You know, like that was kind of neat. And so that's kind of where my head is as far as like, you know, what's going to influence. It's anything in your toolbox that's going to go in the right spot, and you know, you be used in the right way. Because and it makes it really complicated. But guess what? If you get really good at it, you can't just be like, yeah, well, I charge like $2 an hour. You know. So that's a way to look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Name.
My name is Akil.
Akil. Give it up for Akil. Go.
Woo. Okay, so this is going to be kind of rambly because I don't know how to ask this.
Oh, that's great. I love rambly.
But when you were talking about the possible futures of video game scores and how one of your favorites was just sound design and no like traditional score, it kind of brought to my mind what they did for 5 Days of Static did for No Man's Sky, and how they composed something and then they procedurally generated how it appeared throughout the game. What if you could, I was thinking like, how would you be able to implement that like in different kinds of games for just sound effects or just music or literally any audio?
Okay, that's deep. Wow. All right. I didn't think that was rambly at all. I thought that was pretty direct. Nice. So, yes, procedural generation and No Man's Sky was really, really good. Is Brandon Hood in the room? I don't think he is. He's running the live space, but he is like a massive No Man's Sky fan. It's all in behaviors and scripting, right? So you've got like, you know, your C# that you would put into Unity. You've got your blueprint that you would use in the Unreal Engine. I'm sorry, people here are familiar with Unreal and Unity, right? I'm making so many assumptions. Everybody's nodding. Okay, good. All right. So Unreal, Unity are kind of the two big things that, you know, are off the shelf that people use. There's plenty of proprietary stuff that people, you know, that big studios will have their own engines. But within these tools exists the means to say, okay, again, player action this, maybe we'll affect it using this potential range. Actually, Wise does this too. This potential range of notes, or this potential range of tones or semitones, or you know, just even more, you know, microtonal shifts or something like that. You can essentially play around, and then you can do this in Wise as well. It's so cool, and you can make different elements of the music if it was like sound design based. Now you have to figure out what tonality to use and where. And you have to figure out how not to confuse people by making them think that like they're about to be hit by a bullet when in fact it's part of the score, right? You don't necessarily want to send the wrong message, and you don't want to, you know, have people just really weirded out unless it's a game about a schizophrenic guy that, you know, is really crazy. So, so yeah, you can sit down with Wise and you can give it, I mean, it's amazing that people only really scratch the surface, and I'm gonna try to mention this because it is Wise 101, but there's videos all over YouTube about, you know, advanced ways of using, you know, the event system, right? The event system, you can put all these actions in that says when whatever input you get, out comes, you know, this whole smorgasbord of possibilities, and it could be using a low pass filter, it could be, you know, like using any number of different sounds or layering in different tracks. So like, that's how I would see that being done. Like, you know, like whether it's a piece of music that's being affected in that same way procedurally, usually it just, what it means is that it just says like, okay, there's going to be some sort of action, even though we're not going to do specific note values per se, because that technically is a static composition. We take the behaviors, we combine them, we see exactly how it works, so that, you know, it doesn't drive people crazy with atonality, but sometimes the atonality works. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a cool question. All right. Name.
Hi.
Job title. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm Jeremy.
Jeremy. I'm sorry. Everybody's going to get the same treatment.
I have a question about getting started composing music for indie games with like no budget.
Yeah.
What are like some good free or very low cost tools for doing that?
Oh yeah. Well, low cost tool. I'm a Nuendo guy, and it is not low cost. It's a Steinberg tool. But you know, people can be snobs about it, and I'm not a snob about Reaper. Reaper is far less expensive, and it is, excuse my French, fucking amazing. It's a really awesome, it's a really awesome tool. And one of the best parts about it is that it's available for a lot cheaper. There's also, like, when I go onto Facebook, like, colleagues of mine will say, here's the 50 best free VST plugins of 2018 or something. And weirdly enough, there's really good free VSTs, EQs, whatever.
Okay. I don't know what a VST plugin is.
I'm so sorry. A VST plugin is like an effect, or it could be an instrument, but it is Virtual Studio technology by Steinberg, and it is a format that allows you to install, like, say, an extra tool into whatever your digital audio workstation is. So you start with Reaper, and then you decide, oh, I need a new EQ, or I need a new compressor, or I need a new instrument, and then you do a search for free VST. Oh, there's a sign about to go up. We got 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna make this quick. And then you download. You can usually demo this stuff, and then you can download it, and you're off to the races. There are even free sound libraries out there.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you.
good luck. Sure. Yes, name.
Hey, my name's Anthony.
We'll do a quick clap. Anthony. All right.
So you said you've worked with a lot of development teams.
Yeah.
But then you also have games like Cave Story, where the developer also develops the soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh, heck, Toby Fox and Undertale.
Yeah. So what do you think the trade-offs are for working with a team who already has a vision for what they want in the soundtrack versus having your own vision for the soundtrack?
Well, there's really no limits, right? So, like, if you're doing something yourself, really the difference is simply just like working with whatever somebody else's wishes would be, right?
Yeah.
And like you'd have to go back and forth and say like, hey, I think that I'd prefer it this way, and then they say it prefers that way, and you find a happy medium. Whereas if you're doing it, hey, no holds barred, you do what you want.
Do you think that kind of limits you in a way, though, because you're not getting other people's feedback?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, it can. Yeah, no limitation can be a limitation in and of itself. I will absolutely say that, creatively speaking, when we are all just sort of sitting down and we have like whatever. Oh, I've got all the tools I want. Oh, I finally have this, and I can't. I've got writer's block, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when that sort of happens, there are techniques like, think about the things that inspired you like before, right? Like, like what did this do that I'd never even thought of before? Or what did this do that inspired me that I would want to take and, move forward in whatever I'm working on?
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Next. Name.
Hi, my name is Alex.
Oh my God, give the biggest round of applause for this guy. Because he's got the best name in the room.
For real, right?
Yeah.
So I have a comment and a question. So the
Okay.
comment is on the person who was asking about finding VSTs and VST. There's actually a good website called Bedroom Producers Blog.
Oh.
It's kind of a weird name, but they've got like reviews and downloads and demonstrations.
Bedroom Producers Blog, thank you.
Yes, yeah.
I think I've heard of it, I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah. So my question is, so you were talking about maintaining a sort of compositional toolbox, and using both acoustic and electronic instruments together.
Yeah.
Do you see electronic instruments as a kind of extension of acoustic instruments, or instruments in themselves?
I think of them as instruments of themselves. There's plenty of cases like FM sounds that can be made to sound like bell tones, and of course, as you get more, you get more filters and oscillators and techniques that, like Omnisphere, for example, like it has incredible complexity, and other more advanced synths can get more acoustic-y sounding, right? And of course, it combines samples as well. So like there is a blur at some point. But for me, I really do like to I do like to switch my mind from acoustic to electronic, except in the case of something where it's blatantly combined. But I don't necessarily think of them as extensions. I think of them as things that can coexist and that mix together in various ways.
So then you don't see like say if you're like designing a sound, you don't like use the template of like how an acoustic instrument should sound as how an electronic instrument should sound?
Not necessarily, but I do think of frequencies. Frequencies is like, frequencies and frequency bands are like a lot in my head because as you write, it's important to mix, but that's a separate talk.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Your name, sir?
Jean-Paul.
Jean-Paul?
Yes.
What a beautiful name. Yes, I'm going to applaud just because of that.
My question is, since you mentioned you use Nuendo, and I'm assuming other DAWs as well, where do you find like the line or the balance of being a composer versus a sound engineer? Or do you simply use a DAW as, I guess, a techno-artistic tool to like compose?
No, I use it for composition and sound design. Like both of those things. Like in fact, a DAW is really, really good for sound design because you have multiple tracks where you can mix your sounds together. You can use various effects, and then you can in Nuendo, I'm pretty sure Reaper has something like this. You can do something like render, which means you take everything that, and the tracks that you have, and it just spits it out into another track, and then you just have that there. This is sort of like an easy mixdown process.
Do you do your own sound engineering? Like even if like a orchestra was recorded for your stuff? Do you mix your own orchestral stuff?
Oh, when a live orchestra is recorded, no. Typically, I will have a separate mix engineer, and the thing that I am always sure to do is to be present during the mixing sessions.
Yeah, cool.
It's really, really important because you have your own preferences, and oftentimes what you're hearing during the recording process will like vastly change, like if it's mixed in a different way with somebody else gets their hands on it. So,
gotcha. Is there certain DAWs that you prefer for composition versus? You know what? That's cool.
No. Yeah,
okay.
real quick.
For,
I'll make it quick.
For composing, like I noticed, like I started using Pro Tools recently, and it's really not good for productivity as far as like being artistic.
I don't want to say Pro Tools is bad. It's just that having used Nuendo, I've basically just used Nuendo, but I have used Pro Tools, and the MIDI functionality and a bunch of other stuff kind of don't compare to either that or Reaper. So that's just me.
Cool.
Yeah, sure. Name.
My name's Meredith.
Meredith? Your question.
So I've noticed with the bigger games, they have kind of a mix between orchestral and electronic, along with the smaller game studios too. So I'm wondering, because not every game has that, of course, but I'm noticing, because that is the current trend with gaming, who do you think will kind of change that in the future, and where do you think it might go?
You. It sounds hokey or whatever you want to call it. No, I really mean that. And people in this room, myself included, are responsible for taking the homogenized standard, we're going to see a Marvel movie and it's going to sound the way a Marvel movie sounds. And it's not like it's bad. It enhances the action. It's, it's got the stuff we expect. But do we come out of the theater going, that I've got to run out and buy that soundtrack and listen to it in my car, and oh my gosh, that's just totally amazing. Yeah. So I'd say there's people that have unique ideas about, really differentiated scores. Like I think Axiom Verge does some very different electronic stuff, just for starters. Well, Cuphead is an easy example of something that but it lends itself to the genre, right? It's an easy decision to say we want to make the music work with, like a full orchestral score. Obviously wouldn't necessarily work with Cuphead, but that's how that worked. So the games, like I said, it's not just the audio that fits into the game, it's the game imaginative aspects and the art and the direction that the whole game team takes that's going to influence the sound, and it's a shared responsibility as well.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I know you.
Yes.
But say your name anyway.
Hello, my name is Devin.
Devin! Give it up for Devin. I think we'll make it super quick because I want the guy behind you to have a chance as well. But go.
All right. I think I know the answer to this, but since you use Nuendo and you work sometimes to write your music for orchestra, do you use the tools in Nuendo for that, or do you use Dorico? How do you go about that transcription?
Okay, so I typically write everything with MIDI, and then I give all of the MIDI to a guy that orchestrates it, like Paul Taylor. And he is the one that takes it and actually transcribes the notes and puts in the clefs and all of the parts and all of that stuff. Sometimes I have had to do that myself, but yes, I will use Dorico if I have to do it again, because yes, the native notation tools in Nuendo are not great.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the ones in Cubase, and I imagine they're identical.
Yeah, it should be the same thing. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. What's your name?
Kevin.
Kevin.
Yes.
What's up, Kevin? Okay, last question.
So this is kind of just want to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah.
We're talking a lot about integrating sound, like talking about basically like a lot about like sort of aleatorics electronics in it, where it's totally influenced by what the player's doing. And
Yes.
you're building basically the music partially from that. When you get to that point, how do you feel about that in terms of the music and game kind of, because they become one, art form? Can they be separated? Can you release a soundtrack if you do something like that, a separate soundtrack where somebody has to just make those decisions that's different from game? Is it still valid?
I've heard that. I don't know if it's been done, but I think the discussions that have been had is you do like a playthrough, and actually it's kind of cool. It's almost Flaming Lips like, right? So like you do a playthrough and you just record that playthrough, and that goes out as a soundtrack. But that could also mean that you could do another playthrough, and you could release that as like volume 2, and you could make a ton of money. Why am I not doing this? Anyway. Yeah, that is, because it has to be captured in a linear format, right, for people to be able to experience it that way. There's a potential for you to maybe put the engine into the means of like, I don't know, delivering it through Spotify or something, and that when people hit play, it uses the generative stuff and it randomizes a bunch of stuff and creates whatever the sound of what the score might be if you were playing it. Yeah. That's a really neat idea. Cool. Right. Thank you. And thank everybody for attending. I hope you have a great rest of your MAGFest. I'm going to be running immediately over to the Jam Clinic where you can hear me talk about WISE 101.